All right, let me.
I should let the folks know that Dr. Ewing is doing the teaching. I'm just here as a support and backup and questions and that kind of thing.
Well, uh, we're basically going over my charts, and here's now you can see my page here. I take it.
Yeah.
All right, good.
I.
The page that we were working off of is this Anglo-Israel, and we kind of went over this current events last time. I showed you his book is here, and right below his book is where these Bible charts are, and then we've got click on these links, and it pulls up the Bible charts, and here's some of the charts. Now, here's his Facebook page. I went ahead and pulled that up. I'm not logged in, so it doesn't show me this exact thing that most people are going to see if they're logged in. But here's the all videos link, and you should be, after we finish with this, there should be 3 videos listed under this link. So you can look Faith Baptist Ministry on Facebook, and that's where you want to go. Now, his BitChute channel is over here. It's just called God's Covenant People on BitChute. And his, well, I guess I should have pulled up the other one. Let me pull up the other one. It's just listed as Pastor Everett Ramsey. And when you click on that link, it goes to godscovenantpeople.com. And that will bring you over here to Dr. Everett Ramsey on YouTube. And by the way, I'm loading new videos. I think I just pretty much got everything on BitChute all the way up to the 2020 conference. So I finished the 2020 conference last night. So that's where we're at now.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
and this will be also have uncensored videos. So some of the things that we didn't actually put on YouTube because we just kind of self-censored. So those things I've put over here on God's Covenant People. It's funny when you pull up BitChute on Google, it says, "Oh, it's a website for people who are hosting hateful videos and this and that and the other." It's amazing what Google, like Google's the arbitrary of what free speech should be, I guess.
Yeah.
But at any rate, yeah, right now you can, and they're real slow here. I don't understand BitChute; they're a little slow. You can see they've got big skips in the videos, like you see it skipped from video 3 to video 13. Where are the other ones? I don't know. They're loaded. Well, there's video 8 below and so forth. Well, and there's 10. So they mismatch them completely. It makes it very difficult to tell what I've actually put up there because you load it and it might not show up for 2 or 3 days. At any rate, here's our Facebook stream. So I'm also loading those on Facebook too. So you'll have Facebook Stream 1 and Stream 2. This is Stream 2. So you just scroll down this list and you'll find everything that I can put on the web. I'll put over here on God's Covenant People. All right. Okay. Now, what I was going to show you is that this chart, my cross-reference summary, and this other one, tropical cross-references, these are really 2 of the best charts I've got. And one of the reasons is because this cross-reference summary is where I've connected the things points I'm trying to make right now come from the Genesis chapter 12, the Abrahamic covenant. And I'm trying to show that the Abrahamic covenant was actually made by Christ to Abraham, and it's Christ the shield. And we talked about Melchizedek. Go ahead and turn that off.
Okay.
So we tried to cover the connections to Genesis, and we brought it back to Genesis 15:1 about Christ the shield last week. Now, the point about that is the way I look at it, when you put all this Abrahamic covenant in context, actually, I think we're teaching the Abrahamic covenant completely wrong. I think everybody reads it in a different context. So let's just go look at chapter 12, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. And I've covered this before, and I've got a previous video on Anglo-Israel number 7 that I did with Paul, where we covered all this. And actually, I think it was video 5, maybe video 4 or video 5 on truth with Christ. When we were talking about, we covered the same chart. We went over all these connections. And what people need to see is this first Genesis chapter 12. It says, the ever-living then said, and I'm reading out for our fun, but the ever-living said to Abraham, depart from your native land and from the home of your forefathers to the land which I will direct you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will prosper and ennoble your name, and you shall be a benefactor, and I will bless those who, it probably says bless you in King James, and punish those who injure you, and all the nations of mankind shall become benefited from you. But that's not the context. The correct context is that Christ is blessing the 12 tribes. If the 12 tribes are a blessing to other nations, that's a side benefit, but that's not the context of what he's telling Abraham. What he's telling Abraham is that Christ is going to be a blessing to Abraham and his children. And the way we know that is when you go over to chapter 15:1. Well, we know Melchizedek is in chapter 14, but when we get to 15:1, it's mine says it was after these events that the ever-living spoke to Abraham in a vision, saying, be not afraid, I am your shield. So here's someone speaking, saying, I am your shield. And I point out that can't be a person. It has to be Yahovah or Christ, however you want to look at it. I will greatly enrich you. I will be your abundant reward, is how it reads in Farrar. It's actually a little better in King James, but the point is, this is Melchizedek from the previous chapter. We talked about Melchizedek being Christ from the New Testament. Actually, everybody knows the teaching of Christ the Rock from 1 Corinthians 10:4 and that kind of thing. Well, this shield, when I looked up the shield, we went over last week that this is mentioned again in 2 Samuel chapter 22. If you look through chapter 22, it's all about Christ, Christ the Rock, Christ the King of salvation, the Tower of salvation. All of these mentions in chapter 22 are about Christ, and then there's another corresponding chapter in Psalms that says almost identical things are in 2 Samuel chapter 22. So you have the concept of Christ the Rock, and in Psalms and in 2 Samuel is where you also have it's connected to Christ the shield, Christ the King of salvation, which is what Melchizedek means, the King of righteousness, King of peace, that kind of thing. It's King of Salem, which is Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem is what it's talking about. It's the King of Jerusalem, King of peace, and here he's the king or the shield for Abraham. The point is, he can't bless Abraham if he doesn't keep Abraham alive, right? All right. Well, in 15:13, he gives another prophecy about Abraham's posterity. He says he'll bring him out of a nation in 430 years. And that was our quote to Galatians 3:16 that we talked about last week. It's Paul saying that Christ was promised first, and then the law came 430 years later. And I said, okay, well, if Christ was promised first, as Paul said, how would you prove that? Well, the proof is that he's quoting Genesis 15:13 about this prophecy from Galatians. He's quoting this prophecy in Genesis that Christ is going to bring out Abraham's children in the future, which we call the Exodus and so forth. And he did fulfill that prophecy. The point is, Paul said that Christ was promised first. So he's saying that Christ is promised before the law, and then the law, as he explains it, is when Abraham's children are brought out in the Exodus and then given the law at Mount Sinai. That's what he's saying. So where would the promise of Christ come from then to Abraham? It would have to be before Genesis 15:13. Because if he's quoting the law is coming, and he's quoting Genesis 15:13 as that's when his children are going to be brought up, that's when they're going to be given the law at Mount Sinai, then Christ would have had to been promised before Genesis 15:13. And if you look at Genesis chapter 15, then where would that promise be? It's right here. It's Genesis 15:1. And the person speaking is Melchizedek from the previous chapter. I mean, we put these chapters in here, but when it was written, there was no chapter here and all this kind of thing. We added that many years later. When it was written, It just goes from Melchizedek directly to this person who's speaking, who's saying, I will be your shield. And then we know this person speaking is 2 Samuel 22, chapter 22, because that's where Christ the shield, Christ the rock, Christ the scepter of Judah, all those terminologies that are used throughout Scripture tie right back to Genesis 15:1. But Genesis 15:1 comes from Genesis 12. And who's over here in Genesis 12 talking to Abraham? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The only person that can be speaking in Genesis chapter 12 who's going to make you a great nation, it says. Well, this great nation that he's being promised in Genesis chapter 12 is the same great nation in Genesis chapter 48.
Right.
The nations haven't changed. And before it was in chapter 48, it was in 35:11. And before it was in 35:11, there's, I think, 3 other prophecies about being a great nation to Sarah and Abraham throughout Genesis. The nation hasn't changed. It started right here, and then it just expanded. And then he makes more sense as you go on through Genesis. And when you get to the end, you have prophecies to all the nations in Genesis chapter 49. And 49:10 is about the scepter of Judah, which is the most used cross-reference in the New Testament. So in reality, the New Testament is not new. It's actually renewed. Now, this is something that Dr. Miles Jones quoted in one of his videos. He says there's no word new versus the word renew in Hebrew. He says the original New Testament was written in Hebrew, and it means renew in context, because as he recognized that the New Testament is just simply a whole bunch of quotes to the Old Testament, to all these prophecies. All the prophecies about Christ are in the Old Testament. So when Christ came, they knew all the prophecies about the first coming of Christ and what we call the second coming of Christ. They didn't know anything about Christ coming twice. They just knew all these prophecies about Christ, about this Messiah, or as I pointed out, it's Deuteronomy 18:15. The Messiah was called the prophet. That's where he spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, and Moses gave the prophecy about Christ coming in the future as a redeemer for the 12 tribes. The point that we're missing here in chapter 12 is that it's Christ blessing the Israelites. It's blessings and curses. It's Christ blessing the Israelites that believe on him, that follow his law, and cursing the Israelites that don't believe on him and don't follow his law, because that's what happened at Mount Sinai. They got to Mount Sinai. Here he did all these things to bring them out, showed them most of the miracles are between the Exodus and the Sinai events. Almost most of your miracles in the Bible are right there. Now, they saw all this. They witnessed, they walked across the sea, the Red Sea, into Sinai. And then what happens? They're all the heads of all 12 tribes are sent up to spy out the land that he already told them he was going to give them. And where did he tell them he was going to give them this land? It's in Genesis 15. At the end of chapter 15 is where he documents all this land that he's going to give the 12 tribes. The future, or the posterity of Abraham, in other words. 430 years in the future, when they're brought out, he tells you right there in at the end of chapter 15 where the land is. Then when he brings them out, he sends them up to spy out the land. And if you might not remember, but if you go back through Exodus, it actually tells you the names of each person that he sent up to the land of Israel, what was going to become the land of Israel, as we call it, Palestine, in other words. He all this land he promised in chapter 15, he sent them up there to spy it out. And what happened? Only Joshua and Caleb came back with a good report, and the other ones didn't. So then they were hanging out around Mount Sinai. They violated his law in multiple ways. The golden calf, it's all laid out there. And then at one point, you get to the end there and you see, well, he says they had violated his law these 10 times. Okay. If you just count back, you can see they had a little orgy there. They did a number of things and did not follow what Moses told them to do 10 times. And finally, he told Moses to take them by the way of the Red Sea. Now they had just come out of Palestine and come down the Gulf of Aqaba down to Mount Sinai. So he's not telling them to go back. They knew where that trip took them when they're going north. He told them to take them by the Red Sea. That was south. So he told them to take them south from Mount Sinai down the Red Sea, and they went all the way down to what we call Yemen, and then came all the way back up, and that's what took 40 years. Now, what did he do that for? He did that to kill off the Israelites, which were generally what we would call the ruling class, who were the ones that just would not follow what Yahweh was telling them to do, didn't want him to rule over them. They wanted the land and they wanted all the good things, but they didn't want to follow his law. That was what it boils down to. And it's the same way today. Nothing's changed. So he told Moses to take them down. It took him 40 years, and he killed off all the everybody except the children, which were what 20 years and younger, I believe is what it says. And he killed off all the older part of those families. But he didn't kill off the people who did follow God's law. You know, we try to teach it as if all the Israelites at Sinai just rejected his law, but that's not true at all. Most of the people were just the working class. They were okay with following his law. I mean, they just saw these miracles, and they were fine with doing whatever he said. But the ruling class said, "Oh, we'll follow his law, and just you talk to him, and don't let us talk to him, or we'll die." Well, yeah, they're going to die because they said they would follow his law, but then they didn't. And that comes back to the parable of the. I guess I could give us something to look at here. How about this? All right. That comes back to the parable of the son who said, he says, who did what I told him to do? I told one son to go out and do something. He said he would do it, but then he didn't. And then I told my other son to go out and do it, and he didn't do it, but then later on he repented and went ahead and did it. So which one did my will? You recall that? That is what he's talking about that happened at Sinai. They said they followed his law, but they didn't. So they didn't do the will of Yahweh. Where the other ones, a lot of them, maybe didn't want to do what he told them, but they went ahead and repented and did it anyway because Moses told them, and they believed all these miracles, and they went ahead and did what they were told to do. But they also had to go in the desert, but they were the ones that came out the other end with Joshua and went in and took the promised land, you see? Where the ones that died off in the desert were the ones that refused to follow his law, and he sent them in the desert to kill them off. Unfortunately, all of Israel people suffered. And that's a story that we need to learn, is that if you don't, everybody is in the same country under the same law, and your leaders can get us in a lot of trouble, you see?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Right. So in this cross-reference chart here years ago, when me and switch my glasses here, I was looking up through all these cross-references in the New Testament when I was learning the quotes and the cross-references, and I realized that there's certain terms, and if people want to really learn how the Bible connects, they really need to learn these cross-references and these quotes in the Bible, because everything in the New Testament connects back to the Old Testament. There is nothing new. Everything that's in the New Testament actually could have been written as quotes. There's almost nothing in the New Testament that could not have been written as a quote, because it's either cross-reference or cross-reference, because it either comes back as a quote to the Old Testament or it cross-references to something in the Old Testament. So it really just could have been written, most of it could have been written that way. Now we know we have 300 quotes in the New Testament, so there's nothing new about what's there. It starts right out in Matthew 1:1, giving us two prophecies, but we've never taught that prophecy. So I went over that prophecy last week, and I said, look, everybody knows, every pastor teaches Christ the son of David. It's in Psalms, but no pastor really teaches Christ the son of Abraham, because they don't know what the prophecy is. They can see the quote, the cross-reference, which goes over to Galatians 3:16, but they don't know what the quote is. And that's how you figure out what the prophecy is that's being quoted. What's really being quoted is Genesis 15:1 about Christ the shield. However, that comes from Genesis chapter 12, which is really the blessings and curses right there at the very beginning. It's Christ being promised to the offspring of Abraham, not the 12 tribes being a blessing to non-Israel people, which is typically the way we teach it. But they teach it that way because they don't know the prophecy. Now that you know the prophecy, we should be able to correct how we're teaching the Bible, just like now that we know where Mount Sinai is, we should be able to correct and recognize the Exodus. It's amazing to me that a lot of biblical scholars don't believe in the Exodus, but the problem, like Miles Jones said, they're looking at on a timeline or a chronology of all these biblical events, which is about 1,500 years off, I think is what he was saying, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So once you correct the chronology, then you can see the events of the Exodus in just secular history. In other words, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was one of those pastors in Baptist denominations for a long time. Went through a lot of study, but they never did tie the New Testament to the Old Testament. So everybody comes along believing that they have two different testaments that deal with two different subjects. And you're making a very good point, and that is that the New Testament is nothing but the timeline, later timeline of God's covenants with Israel. That's what it's all about. And he covered it in the Old Testament, and he's just putting it in, living it in the New Testament. And many pastors fail to see that Israel is the centerpiece of every single book in the New Testament.
Well, yes, all your prophecies in the Old Testament are simply about these 12 tribes in the New Testament. And the only other thing that I could have gotten to today is I was kind of going over this old chart because the point I was making about this is all these terms in the Old Testament all cross-reference or back and forth to each other. There are no new people inserted in here. There's only one group of people who are foreordained, only one group who are formed in the womb, only one people who the foundation stone applies to, who are called saints, who are called a church, who are called anointed. There's only one headstone. That's Christ the headstone, the cornerstone, all these terms all cross-reference back and forth. No one's called grapes or referred to as a vineyard and all that kind of thing except the Israelites. No one was required or given the commandments, statutes, laws, and ordinances and judgments, you see. Only one group of people. There's only one heritage for Christ, and that's the Israel people. Now, here's a term that you don't know is hornet or terror. That actually refers to Christ back in Genesis. And that's when, they got into his kids, killed these other people in Shechem for raping their sister. Yeah. And Christ came to as a hornet, in other words, to keep people away from. So that's a way of shielding Jacob's children or Abraham's children in this sense.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I was going to suggest that maybe I've lost my train of thought there. I had a thought. I'll get back to it in a minute.
Well, that's okay. I'm just saying that when you start looking at all these terms in the Old Testament, they all cross-reference, and the terms might vary slightly in the New Testament. I mean, you have to look up your synonyms, in other words, because, for example, the rock is one manifestation of Christ, and the shield is another manifestation, but they're not two different people, you see. You've got the royal priesthood, but then you've got a holy priesthood, and you've got an everlasting priesthood, but it's not a different group of people. It's just all the same group of people. You've got Christ is known as the standard. This is very common in Isaiah and in Jeremiah, that he's the deliverer, he's the standard, the ensign, the flag, a sign, or a banner. All those are used exactly as the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, I was
But
going to ask. I remember what I was going to ask you. You know, today it's popular for people to say, "Well, we have to support Israel because God said if we don't bless Israel, we're cursed."
well, they should bless us.
That's the whole thing. Is that's right. So I don't know how you want to deal with that. That may not. This may not be the place to do that. But uh, when God was talking to Abraham and saying he would those who blessed him would be blessed, and those who cursed him would be cursed. I think you have to think in line of his descendants and his seed.
Right.
I don't think you can go by religion, and I think that's the flaw we have in our regular churches today.
Well, we can go through this in the stream, for example, but it'd be much better if people just come over here and look at this chart. It's
Right.
called Topical Cross Reference Summary. And this is where I've connected all the verses throughout Scripture, starting with Genesis, all the way through to who these people are, the two anointed sons of oil, which really come from Zechariah chapter 5, which are the two witnesses in Revelation. They come back to chapter 48 of Genesis, which comes from, like I said before that, 35:9, I think is what I said. It's a prophecy.
Right.
And that's what the prophecy, that's what the symbology, in other words, in chapter 12 of Revelation comes from, is when Joseph gave his second dream to his father, and his father said, "Would me and your mother bow to you and your brothers?" That's the symbology of what you're reading in chapter 12. So it connects to only to the 12 tribes. Symbology doesn't connect to just whoever, you
Right.
see. The eagle's wings that are mentioned, that's in Daniel chapter 7. In other words, it's peculiar people that came from Exodus 19:5, or this peculiar treasure brought to Jehovah on eagle's wings. The eagle wings are Daniel chapter 7 at the very beginning there. It's talking about these empires. And it talks about the eagle's wings, two eagle's wings. That's Manasseh and Ephraim. We just have to get the symbology and connect it all together. So here's what I did. I went through this, and like I said, me and of course we did it about 2 hours. So I already know it takes 2 hours. That's why I'm trying to get it. That's why I'm trying to point this out. I just can't go through this in 30 minutes. You just can't do it.
Right. Right.
Now I could go through some of it in 30 minutes, and some next week, and some the week after, and all that kind of thing. But I've just got a chart with it all connected for you. This where Yehovah called his people gods as little g. That's kind of an important thing. It says, Yehovah judges among the gods, that's his people, and shall inherit the nations, in other words, the nations of the 12 tribes, because I have said you are gods. That's where that came from. That's in John chapter 10, and he's quoting Psalms chapter 82. And he was speaking to the Pharisees. That's a well-known quote from John. See, it says, all of you are children of the Most High. That's something Christ said to the Pharisees at the time. And I put on here, except those of Israel who opt out. And you can opt out just like they did at Mount Sinai. If you reject this Christ, in other words, the spirit of what he did, everything they saw through the spirit of Christ, where he did all these miracles to bring them out, and then they still rejected him when they got to Mount Sinai. Then they were sent into the desert to die because he can't use the people who reject Christ. The Israelites who reject Christ are not his chosen. The ones that accept Christ, which started really there at Mount Sinai. The story kind of starts there. In other words, even though it's a prophecy, like we said from Genesis, it still kind of starts there at the Exodus. Some of them accepted Christ. Those are the blessed of the 12 tribes. The ones who didn't are the ones who are going to be cast out.
Right.
This mercy on the church forever of the church of saints are the ones that are protected by Christ. But it says if they violate the law, they'll be judged and redeemed nevertheless. That's Psalms 82:3. So what I've got here are verses. You see the arrows. That means it cross-references to the next thing. It cross-references to there. And then some of these are just the verses go together. The plus means that one goes to the verse before, in other words. chapter 119 of Psalms. Blessed are the 12 tribes who follow God's law and teach about the stone, the shield, the stone, and the scepter. That's what SSS is. And then that's repeated in Isaiah 41, 1 through 20. And that's the most important thing. In reality, if you, I didn't pull it up. Sorry. Let me just pull it up real quick. If you look on what the word Gentiles means, I don't know how anybody can possibly miss Gentiles. Gentiles are the 12 tribes, Israelites. And the reason is because if you just look at your quote, everybody remembers where in Acts 13:40, around 13:40 to 48 here, Paul is saying, well, he's talking to the Pharisees. He says, well, apparently you don't appear that you want to accept redemption, so I'll take it to the Gentiles. I'll take the message of Christ to the Gentiles. That's where it says right there. Everybody knows that. But if you just look at that, you'll notice that quote on that is Isaiah 42:6. It's also over here in Matthew. I think that's correct. 12:18. At any rate, that's where the word Gentiles pops up in this New Testament. It really just means nations. And in context, it's nations of Israelites. And the reason it's nations of Israelites is because where I was right just here in this verse. Isaiah 41. How do you determine Isaiah chapter 42 is talking about Israelites when it uses the term Gentiles? Well, you just look forward and you look backwards to find what the context of those verses are. And if you go back to Isaiah, you should start in chapter 40. You'll notice it's talking about the house of Israel and the house of Jacob. But in 41, 1 through 20, it says Jacob is chosen and not cast away. Okay. But not those of Jacob, in other words, the 12 tribes that don't want Christ to rule over them. If they don't want Christ, it doesn't matter whether they're Israelites or not. It's blessings and it's curses. As an Israelite, you're cursed if you reject Christ. As an Israelite, you're blessed if you accept Christ and follow his law. That's exactly what it says in Revelation 12 times. And we covered that, I think, in the first stream. You see? Yeah. So it's the ones of Israel who are the trees of righteousness, the family trees, and so on. And right here in Jeremiah is where those two families are. Here's the two witnesses right here. Chapter 30, 31, 32, and 33. All four of those chapters fit together, plus 23, 3 through 8, as I show. These two families, it's Ephraim and Manasseh from chapter 48. They were the ones who were anointed by Jacob to rule over the rest of Israel. Right there in chapter 48. But before chapter 48, they were in 35:11. Before that, they were this prophecy from Joseph that he gave to his father, the second one. And that's what's going to come through on the end time. We're going to see it. And they're also called a crown of 12 stars from 12, 1 through 5, I think, and of Revelation. And they're called two lamb kingdoms. What is a lamb kingdom in your opinion? A lamb kingdom. So it's a kingdom. Yeah. There's two kingdoms who follow the Lamb. The Lamb is Christ. All right. That's what it says in Revelation 13:11. Back in Ezekiel, it calls them two Israel nations, two countries destroyed in war by Edom's continual hatred of them. That's just my reading it. It's judgment from Jehovah for waging perpetual war on other weaker nations to build a global empire. That's what a beast is. It's an empire. And Daniel chapter 7 explains that. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 37, again, it tells you two nations, two kingdoms. So lamb kingdoms are kingdoms of Israel that follow the Lamb. Just like it says in Revelation 12:17 and 14:12, which is where we started teaching. They're kingdoms of Israel from chapter 7 of Revelation, chapter 14 of Revelation, and chapter 15, they're conquerors. And they're called two nations, two kingdoms that follow the Lamb. The ones that of Israel who reject the Lamb are not God's chosen. He's the one that God throws away and destroys. You see, he can't use them. They refuse to follow him. He can't. What's he going to do with them? Yeah, he destroys them. All right. Well, that's pretty much it. And I'd say we're close. Already gone over our limit here.
That was really good. Really
That's
good.
as fast as I can get through it. But they should just take these charts. That's why I put these charts on here. And there's your website. And there's our stream too. So I'm going ahead and putting Facebook on yours and
Okay.
BitChute both.
Good.
Yeah,
Great.
good.
Great.
And then Jews versus Gentiles. That's a very useful chart. Shows you all the quotes on Gentiles. Actually, all the verses in the New Testament that use the term Gentile are on this chart. And then I've already put all that into context for you. So that's what my charts are about, putting all of the Bible into proper context and then connecting the dots.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. I was glad to do it. I'm probably going to look up some of those charts and print them out.
All right. Well, I'm glad we got this done, and hopefully it came through all right and all that kind of thing. I'll go over here and look at it.
Right.
It's still going. It gave me some errors here. So it did say that my frame rate was too low at one point. Blah, blah, blah. Well, whatever.
Yeah. All right. Well, God bless, brother. We'll be in touch.
We'll post it on here regardless. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right. Bye-bye.